What is up, gamers? Something I've been wondering recently is, can Denial Griffin come back to Vanguard? Now, if you're unaware what Denial Griffin is, it is a very old card back in G era, and it was a G Guardian. A G Guardian was something you could put into your G zone that you can guard with by discarding a heal from your hand. And the most notorious one is Denial Griffin. Denial Griffin was a Kagro G guard that said, when placed on Guardian Circle, Counterblast 1, choose the opponent's attacking rearguard and retire it. At a first glance, this type of effect is very scary to have in the game, because a lot of decks are reliant on their rearguards in order to either restand or be the main attacker. And having an effect like Denial Griffin is a very scary prospect to have in a format like Standard, where a lot of the decks are not so resilient on their game plans. Or so we think. The more I thought about this question, the more I realized Denial Griffin could come back. And I don't think it would change that much. Now, obviously, G-Zones don't exist naturally for every deck anymore, so implementing Denial Griffin would be a bit of a hard task in that regard, but we have Blitz Orders now, which is a very clean way to put an effect like Denial Griffin back into the game. So if you make it a Blitz Order, then automatically Denial Griffin will always become a once per turn effect. One thing that Kagro could do back in Gia was use 2 Denial Griffins to blow up both of the opponent's attacking units, which would be very annoying to have a strong turn after the fact, but it was more limited by the number of G-Guards you were able to use being up to 4, and you also had to find heals, which are naturally a bit harder to find than Orders will be. Orders will be a lot easier to find, just due to decks having ways to search for Orders directly now, but now Blitz Orders having a once per turn limitation will balance this out pretty well. And then the other 2 things you could do is, 1, you could make it a Regalis piece. That's something I'm personally not a fan of, because I think having it as a Regalis piece means any deck could play it, and I don't think every deck should be able to play it. Imagine if Bob Saga had a Denial Griffin. That would be very annoying to deal with. So I think Denial Griffin would have to come in name specific. It could potentially come into one of the existing decks like Eugene or Overlord, but I also could see them making a Denial Griffin that would just be in its own brand new archetype. And we just copy paste the effect from old Denial Griffin to this new one. Now you could make the Blitz Order grade 2, so then the deck would be able to combat against going second a lot better, instead of having to deal with pretty absurd turns that a lot of going first decks are able to do these days. So if an effect like this came to Standard and it was played in a deck that would show up in events, how would this affect the meta? So naturally, a lot of decks that are either reliant on end of battle rearguard effects or reliant on the rearguards to restand, then that really hurts those types of decks. So now Bob Sago, instead of becoming a potential 5 attack deck, could become at max a 3 attack deck. It can also hurt rearguards that have drive checks. So like Gabrielius would no longer be able to drive check since it was retired during the battle. The undercover Obscudade couldn't be able to drive check. Things like that. And then also decks that rely on the end of battle effects. So like Rezael with Nilburis would be hurt by this. But there are plenty of decks that can play very well around the Denial Griffin effect. Ava literally can't retire Obscudades while they have the grade 1 set order in play. Decks that are able to superior call mid-battle phase have an inherent advantage against things like this. So a deck like Artisaria or Orphist would be able to call mid-battle phase with their Shadow Army tokens, and then Denial Griffin doesn't really stop the multi-attack, it just stops one attack in that process. A deck like Vaisuga would just lose one potential really big attack, while still being able to attack upwards to 5 times in the same turn. So against some decks, a Denial Griffin effect turns into just a 1-card guard on a lot of things, which is still really good, but it doesn't stop the deck's game plans from doing their thing. Decks that also have restanding Vanguards naturally don't care about this as much. So like Dragonic Overlord doesn't care as much about this. A deck like Youthberg would not care as much about it because Exist naturally will stand one of your rears and your Vanguard. And funnily enough, Vergila literally gets rewarded from it because they put an anti-Denial Griffin effect on Stardust Blade. I assume it's something related to the manga on why that's there. But the fact it's there and there's not a single card in Standard that like procs that is very funny. Denial Griffin effects really make players have to think about their attack ordering a lot more, and it really punishes decks that have very linear attack patterns and are extremely reliant on having 1 or 2 specific rearguards in play. So another example is Heart Luru would end up losing 2 of their attacks in the process. It's one of those swing with both of your rear decks and then swing with Vanguard and then swing with both of your rears again. So a Denial Griffin effect would hurt that by making it end up just being rear, van, rear. It would still be a 4-attack deck, but this one card would prevent essentially 2 attacks in the process. Now, if an effect like this did come back to standard, then Bushiroad will probably end up buffing decks or making new decks that don't really care about Denial Griffin, and will start planning around it by making less rearguard reliant restanders and overloading Vanguard effects even more than before, or just implementing anti-Denial Griffin effects like Resist into decks naturally. But I think Denial Griffin could be a cool aspect for Vanguard, and I think the biggest draw for me about it is it's a new way to handle the overtrigger. Because right now the overtrigger, if the opponent checks it, the only way you can truly stop it is if you have multiple perfect guards in your hand. But Denial Griffin would make it to where if they want to put their 100 million on a rear guard, then you will be able to use Denial Griffin to stop that attack and essentially be another perfect guard in that case. So yeah, overall, I think Denial Griffin would just be a healthy addition to standard. A lot of people were scared that Lock was coming back, and Lock ended up being implemented in a way to where it's not broken at all and has a lot of ways to play around it, and I think Denial Griffin would end up being the same way. We already have decks in the game like Prison, which hyper-punish specific decks that are extremely resource-intensive, and the Denial Griffin would just be another mechanic that would punish a deck that needs one specific rearguard to survive and attack in a specific way in order to do their thing. They could also go really specific with certain decks in the power creep section later in the future. So like you can make a blitz order in Bob Saga that would allow you to equip something from your drop zone. So you could re-equip a shield, and the shield would also draw you a card in the process. That could be something cool. You can give Roa a way to create more plant tokens during the opponent's battle phase. I think adding these types of effects within already made archetypes or even future archetypes would be really cool on giving a bit more dynamic play patterns within standard right now. I don't think we need anything too crazy like what Granblue was able to do with Negro Lily and Beatrice, being able to chain call a bunch of things and be able to rebuild boards and disrupt in a plethora of ways during the opponent's turn. I don't think we need something as complex as that. I think just having something that's a very simple way of just creating a little bit more defensive capabilities built into archetypes would be very cool. And I think a Denial Griffin effect would be the easiest implementation of something like this, but also needs to be balanced in a way where it's not exclusively within a very strong deck that is already like on a high enough power level where just slapping a Denial Griffin just takes it over the edge. It would have to be in a deck that is built around the concept of it having a Denial Griffin effect. Now, at the cost of adding Denial Griffin into standard, we will end up having to sacrifice Gryandra for this cause. And I am completely okay with that. Thank you all for watching.